Owning a home with a basement apartment, or what is most commonly referred to here in my market of the lower mainland of BC as a basement suite, can be a game changer in housing affordability or a complete headache. And there is very little separating those two potential outcomes. After all, housing is so expensive in Greater Vancouver that buying a home with a basement suite is the best tool to get you out of strata living and into a detached home with property of your own. But there are also huge problems with rental suites, and they are not all created equal. And let's face it, most homeowners are not cut out to be landlords. There are legal, financial, and lifestyle factors that you must consider before installing a rental property into your home or purchasing a home with a rental already included. I've been licensed selling real estate since 2008, and I have seen both sides of this equation. Homeowners that have seen massive success and financial gains while providing great tenants with a safe and affordable home, and other owners with horror stories of uncomfortable living situations, stop work orders, and fines from the city, and of course, terrible tenants who have stopped paying their rent. So in this video, I'm going to share with you everything you need to know about having a basement suite of your own. And I'm going to break it down into these three major areas: regulation, tenancy, and finance. So by the end of this video, you will know exactly what to consider before becoming a landlord with a rental unit inside of your principal residence. And of course, if you need help locating the right home and want my team to walk you through the process, well, you can book a call right now using the link in the description below at a time that works best for you. Please like this video because it's free, and all I ask in return is that you click the like button. And of course, if you are interested in staying up to date in the marketplace and you want to learn more about real estate transactions, please subscribe, as it really helps grow the channel. Now on to the first major category: regulation. Now, this is a section all about legal and regulatory considerations, starting off with possibly the most important detail of any basement rental. Is the suite legal, registered, or unauthorized? Now, there are three very different situations here. Legal, well, hey, that's an easy one to understand. The property is allowed to have the rental unit in the basement. It's got all of its permits, it's registered with the city, you're likely paying taxes or utilities on it, and it's ready to go. There is nothing wrong, and if anything, it's even better to have a fully legalized rental unit. However, in my experience, having a fully legalized rental unit is not actually the way it usually goes down. It's very expensive to get permits, and that can actually cause problems. It causes delays, it causes extra expense. So many homeowners end up taking the route of having some sort of an unauthorized or only registered basement rental. So it kind of works like this. Legal, okay, we've got that out of the way. Fully legal, you're allowed to have it, permits are there. Registered, though, could be, and particularly here in the city of Surrey, where I do most of my work and where I live, often the city will just require you to register the unit with the city, so you pay a little extra with the city, but then they don't require you to formally legalize the property, and they're likely not going to make you remove the property altogether. That is still technically then a version of the third category, which is unauthorized. Unauthorized is simply not done with permits, and it either can be registered or maybe it is unregistered. The city doesn't know about it, and you're not paying the extra like property tax and utilities on it. So these are the kind of categories you have to know what you're getting into before you either purchase a home that has one of these. Now, these do have to be disclosed in the home purchase if they are not represented correctly. For instance, if they are saying it's a legal suite, but it's actually unauthorized, or if it's only registered, that's a problem for the seller of the real estate, and it may be a problem for you in the future. Now, the reality of this is the fact that every city treats these differently. Honestly, openly, transparently, the city of Surrey, it's the Wild West here. Like, for the longest time, cities were just trying to register the first suite, let alone the second or third suite that may or may not be in the home. So they've basically given up on trying to force owners into legalization. But every city is different. The Corporation of Delta, for the longest time, pushed really hard for full proper legalization, but they actually did a really good job of working with the owners to, I guess you wouldn't say full legalization. Like, it wouldn't be, you wouldn't have to retrofit a unit to like today's building codes, but you did have to do some certain things like, the heating would have to be done in the right way. There'd have to be proper fire barriers in between the floors, that sort of thing. However, other cities, particularly Langley, Maple Ridge, which is actually in the Vancouver Board area, and slightly even Abbotsford. Well, Langley and Maple Ridge, let's talk about them first. They hunted people down. They went after homeowners, and if the basement suite was not done fully legally, they would make you decommission it and even put a stop work order on your door, and you would have to start over from scratch. I even had a client one time that I sold a property to. They installed for about $30,000 or $40,000, installed a basement suite. The city found out, I'm assuming a neighbor kind of ratted them out. There was no permit pulled. City went in. They had to literally rip out the entire basement and start over so the city could inspect it. Cost them probably another $60,000 or $70,000 to do so. Now, I will also say, in this idea of legal, registered, and unauthorized, since the housing crisis started in like 2021, 2020 even, let's call it, cities have backed off. So this is not giving you free reign to just go out there and have illegal basement suites all over the place. But I'm telling you, cities are not as committed to legalizing them as they once were. So let me give you that. And this is not legal. Don't rely on this at all. I'm going to tell you, you have to legalize your suite. But let me give you the quick rundown of my markets. Delta, you want to have it legal. They slide by not legal often. Surrey, Wild West. I don't know. White Rock's pretty close to Surrey. Kind of, you can get away with a lot of unauthorized units. Langley, absolutely 100%. I would want to have a legal suite if I was in Langley. They did come after people hard, and eventually I'm sure that's going to come back. More so in the township than the city of Langley. And as I said, Maple Ridge, they were just right there with Langley. They were really, really hard to get people to legalize properly, and they would even come and make you kick out your tenant and rip the whole thing out, which is another whole ordeal. And then let's go so far as like Abbotsford. Okay, no, not a big deal. Chilliwack, back to the Wild West. Like, it was craziness. I've had clients put in suites out there, and the city almost doesn't even want to talk to them about it. So treat each an individual city, do your research on them. But I'm telling you, there's a lot more unauthorized suites out there than you think. So if you're buying a home, you're going to want to check whether it's legal, registered, or unauthorized. Next, do you need a business license? Well, this kind of goes along with, well, if it's legal or not. Technically, there are cities that do require you to have a business license, for instance, North Delta. So in North Delta, when you do legalize, you're actually even going to almost get like two addresses. You get like a and B or a 1 and 2 on your address. They do require you to have a business license. I mean, it's, in my estimation, more of a cash grab than anything. Other cities are much less reliant on that, or they don't push you towards having a business license as often. I would even go so far to say, as in most municipalities within the Lower Mainland, you do not need a business license. I mean, technically, should you? Probably. Does the city enforce it? Not most often. Number 3, do I need additional insurance? Of course, you should check with your insurance company to find out if they offer products that will cover a basement rental. My experience shows me that most rental policies for a detached home are pretty close to okay for a rental already. You may have to add possibly some liability. You may have to let your insurer know that you do have a rental in case they do have a policy against rentals. But generally speaking, to add a rental, I haven't seen massive amounts of, cost come to you to add in that extra living space. Generally speaking, I have not seen insurance companies care whether or not the suite is legal or not, which is mind blowing to me. I'm sure they probably do in their fine print, but I don't see the question getting asked, like, show me the legalization paperwork of your rental unit. I would say that you would want to consider, like, if I had a tenant down there and there was some sort of a reason that they caused damage, I would want them to have insurance as well. But I want to make sure my policy covers them. And then I also want to, before I put in the suite, I want to make sure that I can find a policy that if anything happens to that rental, say for instance, it's in a basement, it's downstairs, and it floods, and that uh, tenant has to leave for a certain amount of time, you can buy insurance to cover that lost rental as well. So I would definitely check with your insurance company to see if there's an added cost. My experience has been the added cost, if any, is minimal. Next up, what are my rights and responsibilities as a landlord? If you put in a basement rental into your principal residence, yes, you are tied to the Residential Tenancy Act. You have to use, or you're supposed to use, I'm sure there are people that don't, they probably do it on a handshake, but you have to use the BC Residential Tenancy Agreement. And no matter if you have a tenancy in a condo somewhere else, the tenancy in your basement is exactly the same rules. So you have to follow those rules. And my recommendation for you is not only do you get totally familiar with all of the things that are happening in the tenancy board, the rules for eviction, the rules for how to serve notice, how to do maintenance, all these different things that you have to do. But now this is your home as well. So these people are going to be living under your roof. So you very likely want to put together a very detailed Schedule A, or I guess added clauses into your residential tenancy agreement in order to cover all sorts of things that you never would have thought. I had a tenant once and again, in a condo. So again, whether or not you think this needs to be put in or not, or if it's different in a basement suite or not. But I went in and, well, it became obvious to me that they didn't own a vacuum. So at that point, it was when the next tenancy came around, when those people left, I started adding in silly little things you didn't have to think about, or you thought you didn't have to think about, like, hey, you got to vacuum every 2 weeks. And of course, now with legalization of marijuana, that needs to be excluded. There's so many things that can be added on top, but you do have to follow the letter of the law first. And then any supplemental things to be added on, well, they have to make sure they don't contradict the Residential Tenancy Act. Number 5, are there parking requirements for my rental? And the answer is similar to my number 1 answer. It depends on the city that you're in. Generally speaking, here in my market of Surrey, what you're supposed to do, and nobody does this, it's never enforced, but what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to have one off-street parking for your rental unit. It doesn't say the owner has to can't park on the street, but it has to say one off-street parking for each rental unit. I'm telling you, at least in my city of Surrey, that is never followed. I know very few people who let their tenants park on their parking pad or arrange extra parking for them, and that is actually the problem. This is where you get into areas like Clayton and Surrey that are multiple rental units per house plus 30-foot lots, and parking is an absolute disaster. So you're going to want to check with your city where you're putting your rental unit to find out if you have parking requirements. If you do have parking requirements, my thought is you should adhere to them. It's going to make your neighborhood a whole lot nicer. And since we have now already kind of dabbled into the second major section, now let's talk about tenancy, and specifically tenant management and lifestyle considerations. Because we've already gone through 5 tips, let's call this tip number 6. How do I screen my tenants properly? This is the biggest mistake after the unit's constructed. If you didn't make a mistake constructing a unit, screening tenants poorly is the number 1 issue I see. So many people are like, oh, that person seems nice. Oh, they seem like they have a good job. I'm just going to give them a handshake, no proper tenancy agreement, and I'm not going to necessarily check their credit, or they showed me their credit karma, so we are good to go. No, 100% full stop. No. Do your proper checks. This person is going to live underneath of you in your home. You have to do your due diligence. It is not acceptable. It is not acceptable to be lazy at this point in the game. With 100% certainty, you must do a credit check. There are lots of companies out there that will allow you to do a credit check as long as you have written permission from the person applying. Yes, go through, do an application process. You can ask for an application. You can ask to do a credit check. You could even go into criminal background checks. Personally, I do a credit check. The first thing I'm looking for is all of my tenants have to have an over a 760 credit score. Personally, my tenants, even 800, I want 800 or above. If you have an 800 credit score or above, you pay your bills and you can be my tenant for the most part. But at the same time, 760 is kind of the best credit rating. It's like anything over 760 is kind of the top, the cream of the crop. So I would be okay with that. Personally, if you were under 700, if you were like 670, I think 670 is the minimum you need to get a mortgage. I would be in tough there. So use some services, maybe something like I believe Front Lobby is a good one to use. Not being paid by them at all, but I actually use them as a service, and they're going to give you some sort of a printout to show you the credit. And credit tells you so much. I'm sorry. I know there's a bunch of people that are out there that are in tough or they've had credit challenges in the past. I absolutely sympathize, but I might rent you another condo of mine somewhere, but I'm not renting in my principal residence. Just not going to happen. The next step is income verification and employment. You definitely want to verify their income, but I mean, if they're bad, they're going to know how to get around this. They're going to give you an application. It's going to have their employer's phone number, their manager's number. And if they're a bad tenant, that's actually not going to their employer at all. And it's just going to a friend of theirs who's going to lie to you. So never, ever, ever phone the phone number that is provided to you on the application form. Always Google the company, make sure they're a company, and verify that they're a proper company, because there's even been some scams there where they're setting up fake companies or at least fake websites. So be super careful. But if you get a good credit check and you verify their income, usually I will ask for their HR department and just say, listen, you don't have to tell me anything particular about this person. They're applying for my unit. I just want to verify. They've stated that they make approximately $56,000 a year. Is that a true statement? Yes or no? Most HR departments will say yes or no, or that's about right, or they don't work here anymore. But you're going to want to verify that because you want to make sure they have income, because that income, part of it's going to be coming to you as the landlord. And here's a tip. This is only a tip. I don't even know if this is legal. I'm just going to give you a tip. Ask for a personal reference. And when I ask for a personal reference, I ask for family. I want to talk to your mom, dad, brother, sister, cousin, somebody. And the reason is, as a tenant, you think they're on your side. The first person that's going to give you up or talk about how messy you were, or it was really too bad you got kicked out of that last place, the person that's going to give you the straight goods is that person. I do not want you to ask for the current landlord. The reason is, you think about it, if that person's currently in your unit, and you're getting a phone call and you don't like your tenant, you want them to move on. So you might be tempted to lie and say, yeah, they've never missed a payment. They've never. So previous landlords, I toss them for references out the window. But whatever you do, don't do it on a handshake. Do a proper application, get their permission to check their credit, actually go through and check their credit. It's going to cost you some money and it's going to be worth it. 7, and probably the number one thing keeping people from putting in some sort of a rental unit. Will I still have privacy when I move a tenant into my basement? Well, the reality here is, of course, you're going to have privacy, but there are concerns that you are going to have. For instance, what type of construction is your home? Here in BC, we have something called the BC box, which is just a 2-level home. And you have like a basement entry. So there's a basement downstairs that you walk right into. You actually have to go upstairs to the 3 bedrooms and the living room and everything. This is a very typical kind of 1960s, 70s, 80s house. Problem with this type of house is that primary bedroom is generally right above one of the bedrooms for the downstairs unit. So, if you have bedroom noises going on at certain times, you could actually suffer with a little bit of privacy problems. Or, for instance, in the newer style of homes where most people will come in through the backyard and then down into a basement kind of stairwell. If that basement stairwell isn't on the same side as your gate to let them in from the front street, you're going to have some privacy concerns. So it's really important to work, I think, with your agent when looking at homes, or with your contractor if you're installing a basement suite, to consider how this privacy is going to work. And that kind of comes along with number 8, how loud is it going to be? Again, if you're in this 2-story style 1980s homes that were never meant to have a rental apartment in them originally, it might be louder than you like. If you're in a newer home, which is often a two-story home with a basement, well, now your sleeping area is on the top floor and your rental is downstairs, so the noise transfer is not going to be as bad. If you fully legalize the basement rental, the noise is actually probably going to be very little. With legalization, usually you have to put in its own heat source and terminate the vents between, the furnace that's running the whole house. You have to terminate that into the basement rental area. So as a result, you don't have any duct noise. It will quiet things down a ton. And if you're doing this yourself, if you're actually installing a rental unit in your basement, I 100% recommend, for the cost, it's not going to be cheap. It's going to be a few $1,000 for the cost. Noise proof the ceiling. Even if you need to rip down the drywall, put a whole bunch of rocks all up there, and then seal it back up and re-drywall, it's going to be a few $1,000. It's going to be worth not having that noise transfer one way or the other. And as a tip, if you do have some noise transfer coming through because you have an unauthorized unit and you do have heat that is connected just in a singular unit through a furnace, say for instance, if you do something as simple as turn on the fan to your furnace, just that airflow going through the vents will cut down on the noise dramatically. However, you could also take a positive spin on any noise that you do hear. For instance, if, Friday night and your tenant downstairs has somebody over for a dinner party or something's going on, they're watching the hockey game, you could just mute your TV and say, listen to that. That is rental income. That is the noise of making money in your sleep. Or I guess you're not sleeping because it's a little loud, but you get my point. Number 9, can I restrict what my tenant does in the space? And the answer there is yes, but no. You have to follow the tenancy branch rules. You have to follow the Residential Tenancy Act. So can you, for instance, tell them they're not allowed to knock down a wall? Of course. Can they do renovations? Likely not. But are you allowed to tell them, can they hang pictures on the wall? Well, now we're getting into kind of a gray area here. Some landlords do restrict that. Some don't. I personally don't. I want them to be happy and live in their unit and stay for a really long time. But where I see this go wrong a lot of the time is people will be like, "Oh, I rented to, a single guy, and, every second weekend he brings a lady home, and it may not always be the same lady." And you can't stop that. These people are living their life too. You cannot necessarily restrict what they do within their space. You can do things like restrict if they're allowed to have pets, if they're allowed to add people. And again, here in BC, that's a really tough thing because they can now add at no fee. They can add children under 19 years old. Anybody over 19 years old can actually, but you have to put it in your original addendum that I talked about previously. You can actually have them get charged an extra fee in order to bring in somebody else, or you can restrict them and say, no, you're not allowed to have anybody else. But that has to be done very, very carefully. And it has to be agreed to before the tenancy starts. Number 10, what happens if my tenant stops paying rent? Well, I'm going to refer you to the residential tenancy branch. It is the same as any other rental. Technically, you need to, at that point, serve notice as per the law. You need to check in with the tenancy branch, file any sort of petitions to have them removed. There's lots of steps you can take. You are at the mercy of the tenancy branch, however, so be very careful back with your screening again. And this is, again, I'm going to go into the take your own steps, do your own research. This is not legal advice. If somebody for instance, if I did have an unauthorized suite and I don't know, let's say I was supplying them with internet, which very often happens. Sorry, I can't afford to pay for my internet anymore because you aren't paying your rent, right? These are the things that could possibly happen. It's a creative way to maybe inspire your tenants. I'm not saying it's legal. I'm not even saying I would ever do it. I'm just saying it's a totally different situation when you have a tenant that stops paying rent in your home. I've known people that have had bad situations like that. But most people take it a little bit more serious when it's a basement tenant, as opposed to, say, somebody that's living in their investment condo down the street. So do your research in advance. I've never had a tenant not pay. I've had a couple of late payments, but I've never had a tenant not pay that that had a good credit check and a good application way back when they came in the first time. And the last topic gets us into what might be the most important section of this whole talk about installing a basement rental in your home, and that is finances. Now, this is the part that is most important, as I said, to most of you out there watching, because this is likely the whole purpose about why you're watching or considering putting in a basement rental in the first place. To ideally put yourself in a better place financially as a result of providing great housing to your tenant, like a win-win situation. So if you've been counting along, this is number 11. How much rental income can I expect? Well, I'm not just going to timestamp it and say this is much for a one bed or this much for a two bed. Rents are always changing. Currently in the market, rents are actually coming down a little bit. I do want you to know that you are not going to get as much for a one bedroom basement rental as you are for a one bedroom condo rental. Same for two beds. Prices are going to be cheaper rent because, hey, they're living in a basement. They might even be living fully underground. They got people above them, and there is noise above them. I guess that's a consideration we didn't even really talk about for the noise rental. You're going to have impact of noise on them as well. So they're going to expect a little bit of a break. When I look at basement rentals in any area for a client, uh, I will spend a lot of time on like Facebook Marketplace, on Craigslist, on PadMapper to try and find out what people are asking. Now, unfortunately, a lot of those are asking prices for rent and they don't actually post what those units were rented for. So I like to take the average kind of the area, see what people are expecting to get, and know that those units likely aren't rented. So I'm going to put my actual expectation of rental slightly below that. For instance, if all the one bedroom apartments out there right now are renting for $1,500 a month, or they appear to be renting for $1,500 a month on Facebook Marketplace, I'm probably going to expect I'm going to get 14 to 1450. So consider that and do a little bit of research, because this is kind of the biggest factor for most folks. Is quite often they'll overestimate how much they can expect. And I mean, just because you have $1,500 a month coming in doesn't mean that's how much you have to go out. So I wouldn't necessarily increase my housing budget by $1,500 a month just to get it to something with a suite, because you're actually going to be feeding it more than that. And on that topic, number 12, will my rental income help me qualify for a larger mortgage? The answer to that question is likely yes, but maybe not as much as you think. It depends on which institution you're going to. Some institutions don't look at basement rentals towards what you can actually afford at all. Some of them will take 50% of the rent, and some of them will take 100% of the rent as, hey, this is income. This is going to help me pay the bills. So you really have to be careful. Generally, I would say yes, but I think it's a very poor decision to go to your maximum knowing that you're relying on that income, because now you're likely going to make some, what I would say, maybe poorer choices because you're so desperate to get somebody into your rental. So I would try and qualify for the home and then look at the rental income as a bonus, possibly putting me in a little bit better situation, again, rather than being strapped and relying on that income every single month. Because personally, I don't think that's you're buying above your like weight class, right? Like you really can't afford that home now because you're relying on this income. This income should be supplementing and making your life better. It shouldn't be a requirement in order for you to just own this home. And actually, I would say the best case scenario is, let's say you're in like a large townhouse and it's ready and it's time for you to move up to that detached home. And the best way for you to get there is actually your carrying costs won't be that much different once you factor in the rental. So you can likely qualify for that detached home, not require the rental. But after you factor in the monthly income, then you can actually look at your overall budget for the rest of the year. And it's likely, after like strata fee and all those other expenses that you have living in a strata, it's likely very close to, or maybe sometimes even cheaper to live in the detached home when you put that rental in downstairs. But next, and most often overlooked, number 13, what are my tax implications? Of course, I have to say, talk to your accountant to find out. But what most people don't tell you, and I would assume most people don't do or claim at all, is this as income? And it is income. It is rental. You need to be taxed on this. You need to take this income coming in and you need to report it to the Canada Revenue Agency, which I'm assuming a whole lot of people just don't do. Now, there may be write-offs that you have. You may be able to take things like mortgage interest and put it against the income. You may be able to do things like utilities or even improvements, and that might all be able to go against your income. You have to talk to your accountant about that. But this is not tax-free money. I know there's a whole lot of folks out there that'll take cash under the table. I'm telling you, this is not the case. This is income and you need to claim it. 14, how will my utility bill be impacted? Well, this really kind of depends on what you mean by utility bill. And I'm just going to break this out into first things like electrical and gas. Yeah, if you have somebody living in your home, they're likely going to use, if you have laundry down there, a lot more electrical is going to get done. There's going to be more hot water used. It will impact your bills. This is why the most common thing that I see now with anybody that has a basement rental is they don't just have a flat fee. Like, I charge you $1,000 a month to live here. Most folks don't do that. What most folks are doing now is they go, okay, here's your $1,000. And when the utility bill comes in, when the hydro bill comes in, when the gas bill comes in, I'm charging you appropriate amount compared to the square footage in the rest of the house. So if it's a 3-level home and the whole bottom floor is like a third of the home is the rental, they will charge 1/3 utilities to the tenant downstairs. Now, it's hard to manage this because you have to actually go after a different amount each month and maybe even 2 different payments from your tenant. So it is tough. But in particular, if you have a fully legal suite and there are electric baseboards downstairs, you can't just put your furnace on like a schedule to be at the same temperature all the time. If that tenant starts cranking up the heat, it could cost a whole lot of money each and every month. And depending on how you define it, we're kind of being lumped in here to number 15. How will a rental suite impact my property taxes? My understanding is that in most municipalities, you're not actually going to necessarily have a massive increase in your taxes. However, the utility portion, for instance, here in Surrey does go up. So if you have a unit inside of your house and you claim it with the city, you're going to get another tax bill, utility bill of, I don't know, let's call it $500 to $700 per year for extra garbage and water, even though you already pay for your water. So you're going to have some sort of fees added on, likely. However, will your property taxes be severely impacted? Likely not. But then number 16, what about the costs of maintenance and repairs? Well, you're the landlord. You're going to fix what's going on wrong in your house. Be prepared that your tenant is going, like when your tenant reaches out to you, they're not phoning just to say hi. They're phoning to say, hey, this broke, that broke. I need something fixed. Um, Whenever a tenant phones me, whenever one of my tenants, I see them on my call display, it's usually not a happy day. So there will be costs. Now, this is going to go back to screening. If you're going to say, for instance, you have a 1-bedroom basement suite, and in our area, we're seeing this all the time right now, and you have 4 or 5 or 6 people apply because they're new to the country and, they're really scraping by. They've all got minimum wage jobs. It's very expensive to live here. If you accept 5 or 6 people, the damage and the repairs and the wear and tear on your property is going to go up considerably. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about maintenance as being as big of an issue. If you do put in people that, say, for instance, have pets, or there's a lot of people living in the area and you're happy because you're getting more rent, be prepared that in the future, when those people move out, there's going to be way more wear and tear. You may be replacing carpets, you may be re-drywalling or painting or fixing nicks in the wall. So there will be costs of maintenance and repair. And my suggestion to you, in order to try and keep that down, is try and get a good, respectful tenant. And unfortunately, try and get as few people in the unit as possible because your costs of repairs when they move out will be likely substantially less. Number 17, can I raise the rent? Of course you can raise the rent, but you can only raise it in line with BC's Residential Tenancy Act. Every September for the following year, they release how much you can increase your rent by. And you have to follow this strictly. And the rules are even getting crazier and crazier. You have to give like 3 months notice to increase the rent. So that's why they give it out in September. Let's say, for instance, they say next year you can go 2%. And they're usually like 2 to 3% max. They used to be way greater than that. They're not anymore. So let's say, for instance, next year you can raise the rent 2%. They're going to tell you that in September because you have to serve that notice by the end of September in order to collect that rent for January 1st. That's how far out you need to do. So any raising of rents has to be done in accordance with the Residential Tenancy Act. Number 18, how will having a rental suite impact my home's value? The answer is, at least in the lower mainland of BC, it will greatly improve the value of your home. We see homes all the time that are like the OGs, the old folks that have lived there for 40 years. They've never finished their basement. They've never put a basement rental in. The home is nice. They will sell for dramatically less. Now, when I got into the business, rent in a basement suite was $500 a month. So it wasn't really that big of a deal. If a suite was in, you get an extra 10, 15, 20 grand for your house. Like, it was not a big deal. Now, because of the cost of living and the fact that so many people rely on basement rental income just to subsidize their own housing upstairs, the cost of buying a home with a rental suite in it already, particularly a fully legalized rental suite, is greater than it was before. I've seen some be the difference of like $100,000. In some of these homes where they're jamming in illegally, mind you, 2 suites or even 3 suites, the prices are going up because the income coming out of them is crazy. And those people buying those homes value that. And the reality is, there's not a lot of home buyers these days looking at detached homes that can do it without a rental unit. And even more so, they don't have money left over. Let's say you squeak into a $1.4 million home, even a $1.2 million home. Let's say you squeak into it. That's a perfect example. $1.25 million home. It's got no basement. You squeak into it. You got no money left over. That person, if it has a rental income paying $1,500 a month, they might pay 1.35. They might pay $100,000 more for that same home because they're getting $300,000 worth of monthly payments out of the basement. So yes, having a rental in your home currently in this marketplace will help you sell for a whole lot more. Number 19, how will my tenants themselves impact my home's value? They absolutely will. What everybody wants as a new landlord or a new home purchaser is they want that basement vacant. If they can put in their own tenant that they're comfortable with. They know then for sure you're not leaving because the tenant was so bad that you're just done with them. They never paid their rent. And they're going to get today's values. Having a tenant in place is very rarely a positive. So consider the fact that if your place goes vacant and you're considering selling, you may not want to rent it out again. So for the sake of $1,500 a month, as we've used in these examples, for say a 1-bedroom apartment, say now the rents have gone up a little bit and you're looking to sell and you just put in a new guy and you get $1,600 a month because you really want that $1,600. Well, the new buyer may not want that tenant. And that may be enough to scare them off because they want to put in their own tenant. They want to feel like they're comfortable with the person that is downstairs. So they may actually offer less as a result of having to take on your tenant. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's a true fact. So make sure you have a good tenant. Make sure you increase their rents and stay in line as best you can with current market values. Right now, this year, you probably don't want to increase because rents are going down. But in future years, when rents go up, you got to increase their rents, because the other side of that is if you have a tenant in, and let's say they're still paying $600 a month, and I've had this happen recently, that's a bad thing. And that's actually going to devalue the property as well. Because number 20, can I evict my tenant to sell the home? The answer is 100% no. The only reason you can really evict, I mean, there is some reasons you can evict a tenant, like renovations and that sort of thing. But generally, the only real reason you can evict a tenant is to take over for your own personal use. And you have to do that for 12 months. So if you're going to do that, you could evict the person. You would have to give them 4 months notice. And then you would have to occupy the home, the entire home, not rent it out to somebody else for another 12 months after that, or they can come after you. So know this, if you are currently selling your home and the tenant downstairs is not paying enough rent and the buyer asks in the contract for you to evict them, the buyer can technically do that with 3 months notice. However, get this, if they put a new tenant in there, now who's in trouble? Well, it's going to open up a whole mess of a situation. We see it happen all the time. We have buyers and buyers agents lie about putting in a tenant, or we're going to, have our family down there. Trust me, it doesn't happen. This is abused all the time. But whatever you do, if you're selling your home, do not try to evict your tenant in hopes of getting in a new tenant that's paying a higher rent to value your home more, because you are going to get in a whole lot of trouble. Now, if all of this makes sense and all you need to proceed is an agent to help, please go ahead and reach out to us using the first link in the description below. But if you're not in a position to purchase a detached property and you are just looking to put your foot on the first rung of the property ladder, check out this video right now. This video will guide you through the right way to get into the market and work your way all the way up to your forever home.